Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about using metacognition to support the progress of pupils and students in 14 to 19 age groups. When I've presented things on this to GCSE and A-level teachers and BTEC teachers, I've asked them what their concerns are about students in this age group, and quite a number of commonalities occur. There's certainly a high volume of information to retain in both GCSE and A levels, and that's one concern, is about how much students need to know. What teachers often talk about are the intervention sessions and the revision sessions that go on across schools and colleges in the lead up to exams, so sort of Easter revision, after school revision classes, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of work being done by teachers. Teachers are doing the heavy lifting on this. There's obviously the anxiety and stress that students face around exams, stress related to target grades. We often find that students perform inconsistently across subjects, so they might do really well in one subject area and not very well in another subject area, and we can think about metacognition as a way of balancing that out. Revision sessions work well for some students but less well for others, and some revision techniques work for some and not for others. What we also need is deep learning, not superficial knowledge. So it's not enough to just retain information, you've got to be able to apply that information as well. There's the time in terms of the curriculum and the amount that needs to be covered. There's obviously that blanking in the exam caused by stress and their performance on the day, and what we can do in terms of metacognition to help with that. They need to apply their knowledge. Teachers talk about a lack of time and to consolidate that knowledge within the curriculum. And then there's that unfamiliarity in exam context as well, because they really are expected to be able to transfer that knowledge across. So this document from a very old DFE document tells us really that there has been a lot of existing research and teacher guidance about learner behaviour that references metacognition and self-regulation. I think sometimes we can easily assume that these behaviours naturally develop. I think it's worth looking at this list to consider whether your students, when they leave school at 16, or if you're in a college, when they enter your college at 16, whether they are exhibiting these behaviours. So we need to think about, do we actually need to give more instruction and more structure and more practice to developing independent learning than we might typically think we need? There's a bit of a myth that when students come into the post-16 sector in particular, that they are self-regulating learners because they've already been through an exam process. And of course, in the context of COVID, they haven't at all. So we've got all of these additional challenges as well. So Dunlowski reviewed the effectiveness of 10 learning strategies, and he chose those strategies based on 3 criteria: that teachers could coach the students without sacrificing too much class time, that they were already supported by promising research evidence, or because they aided memory of concepts and facts. And the important thing about these strategies is that these are strategies that are undertaken by students in their own time. So these are Dunlowski's 10 strategies, and you'll notice those with low efficacy are things like highlighting and summarising text. Now, there is a place for those in learning. In terms of high and moderate evidence, we've got these 3 at the bottom: of practice testing, space practice, and interleaved practice. The interesting thing about this is some further research done by Carpick. They asked college students to list the strategies that they were using whilst they were studying, to rank order those strategies. So these results show that students' most frequent study strategy by far is repetitive reading of notes or textbooks, active retrieval practice lagged far behind that repeated reading. Not only was repetitive reading the most frequently listed strategy, it was also the strategy most often listed as the student's #1 choice by a large margin. So why do students use such ineffective learning strategies? It's partly to do with the illusion of fluency, but it's also because we don't tell them enough about the evidence about what improves long-term retention. So, and when we do show them the evidence, I think it feels counterintuitive to what they feel. So you'll often hear them saying, I can't revise like that, it doesn't work for me, because they find it hard, because retrieval practice is hard. We prefer to reread. It's a lot easier to reread, but it doesn't mean that we're doing anything active. There is then the illusion of fluency. We think we've learnt it. We think we're fluent at it. You ask a student to explain something to you, quite often they'll say, well, I can't explain it to you, but I can write it in the exam. Well, if they can't explain it to you, they can't write it either. We underestimate how much we forget. We overestimate how much we remember. Quite often it's that they just haven't been taught effective strategies by teachers who are then articulating that is a strategy that they can then use in their own revision. I think sometimes we just assume that once we've given them some examples, they will then know how to use them in their own time. So in order to address this, our science department reviewed this with their own students. They suspected that while students understood the concept of revision, they lacked the knowledge on how to approach the task. They surveyed the students. They found the students couldn't name strategies. So some of them knew about revision cards, but they didn't really know how to use them. Some of them went straight to exam questions without marking their answers, without making use of notes. The AS and A-level science curriculum is very content heavy, so they needed to find a way to improve independent study that would help the students better retain what they were learning in class, to ensure that that approach could then be consistently applied across all scientific disciplines, because quite often we have students that do at least 2 sciences. They wanted to do that to make sure that the students weren't overloaded with different methods and that they weren't confused about things. They wanted a consistency across the whole science team. So as advised in recommendation 2, they decided to explicitly teach students to how to organise and effectively manage their learning independently. So they used the feedback from their department meetings to construct this document, How to Revise for Science A Levels. This was used right from the start of a student's academic career. So as soon as they came to us in year 12, they started to use this in all science subjects. They broke the revision down into the revision process down into 5 key stages of consolidation, learning, assessment, feedback, and action, and gave them these examples about how each stage worked and how they could effectively carry out that stage for each topic covered. The teachers then began to use the language from this guide in their teaching. They modelled these strategies at the end of every topic, every couple of weeks. They built discussions in with the students after tests to allow them time to reflect on how to improve their revision in the future. They built in that plan, monitor and evaluate of metacognition in using this sheet with them as well. Peer mentoring that was going on between students was also supported with a focus on these 5 stages of revision. Staff reported much more productive progress in one-to-ones with students in their discussions. The students could now really clearly articulate the strategies and how they were using them. And that enabled staff to be much more precise in their advice on setting clear and individual targets during progress monitoring. So they'd give targets like students need to focus, this student needs to focus on stage 2 of the revision strategy, learning their notes more thoroughly by rewriting their notes, using flashcards, reducing information. And that gave students much smaller, more directed targets, and it felt much more manageable for the students. In addition to this, we used things like exam wrappers, so short reflective tasks that students would get after a piece of work or a practice exam paper or a mock exam, just so that we were thinking about, can we just ask a few more questions to support students' metacognition? So in this, you're really asking them, before you give them their mark, to think about how long they spent on preparing, what kind of methods they used. Did they feel that they benefited from those? How do they think they've actually done in that test? Before you then give them the results back, so that they're being honest about the work that they did, and then they can reflect on what they might do differently this time. So this is an example of one from sociology, where there's a set of questions about the kind of strategies they used, the time that they spent doing that. So I think the key thing to consider from all of this is, do you think your own pupils and students know how to revise? Do you think that teachers at your school teach students to use these strategies effectively? Are they modelling them as part of their teaching? Do parents understand how their children can revise? Do they know how to support them in that? Do they know what questions to ask? So that they're not just saying, oh, he's in his bedroom for 2 hours, I know he's doing loads of work. Do they actually see what they're doing in that time? And how can you improve the way that your students revise in your school or in your subject area? So they're the questions that I'll leave you with. Thanks.